If you have at all had your TVs on to any news stations recently, you know the big story is about what is happening in Israel. There is this intense conflict and war that is going on over there with the terrorist group Hamas in the area of Gaza. You know, what has happened is Hamas has launched an attack on Israel about a month ago with thousands of rockets sent into the people and into Israel. Israel has retaliated and has vowed to destroy all of this group called Hamas. And it's ugly, it's nasty, and thousands of lives have been lost on both sides. But there's something about this region and this war. There's a watch group that kind of keeps track of the number of conflicts that are going on around the world, and they say there are 32 wars and conflicts that are happening in the world right now. I thought, well, that's kind of amazing. I didn't think there was that many. I know of a few. But, you know, this one stands out, and for reasons. There's something about this region. It has always been this contentious place for centuries, and I believe it's worth us, you and I, to take some time here to talk about what's going on, what we're seeing currently happening. And so we're going to, for the next few weeks, talk about this, what we're seeing there, happening there and now, and review that a little bit, but not just because it's something that is contemporary that we're seeing happen right before our very eyes, but this place and these people and what it is that they stand for and what is going on there is so intertwined with our faith. And that's the approach that we're going to take here. We're going to look at this not so much from, nuts and bolts kind of things, but we're going to take a deeper look to see what are the implications in regards to how this affects our faith and how this affects our lives as spiritual creatures. And I think it's good for us to examine what is going on here, because I hope at the end of this, you and I both have a more deep understanding of God's plan, the nature of us, the nature of people. And then maybe most importantly, what's our part in this? Because I believe when we get done with this, you look at the headlines, you see what's there, it seems so far off, halfway around the world, But I think that we have a part in this that's happening today, what's happening in the Middle East. There's a whole bunch of things that I'm not very good at. Just get that out there. I'm still looking for something that I'm good at, but I've got to do a little bit of background on this, and there's something I just don't have a lot on this. Is I can't provide a whole lot of the geopolitical stuff that's happening over there. It's just not there. But I can scratch the surface of it just a little bit, and I want to take some time. And so humbly, I was a math major. I wasn't a geopolitical major, and so I don't know jack about this, but bear with me here a little bit, and I think I can give us a little bit of background to see what's going on. There's a graphic here that kind of helped me a little bit. Clearly the conflict that's happening there now has to do with religion, and this kind of helped share this with me a little bit. So any of the nations there that have a green tint to them is Muslim. That's their religion is Islam. They're Muslim people. A lot of green around there. And then Israel, you can sort of see as the orangish brown down in the lower part there. You can see the big word Israel there. And the bulk of that is Judaism. Those are the Jewish people. And then you'll see a little bit of reds tucked in and around in there, and those are Christians that are in the region. But I point that out because it's easy to see there that you have one nation that is Jewish, and they're surrounded by a whole bunch of green, right? And that in itself brings all kinds of reasons to the problems and the conflicts we have, because we tend to fight over the differences in religions that we have, don't we? So that's one element of the problem there. Another one that I found, and this doesn't work out real well, this was kind of a cool site. This was kind of an interactive thing. Sorry, I got to move over here so I can see it. But if you would move your mouse around and pick any one of the regions in the area, it would show how that nation is linked to the other groups that are around them. So I took a snapshot of this, and if you can catch it, right in the middle there is Israel, where you can see my little mouse. Can you catch that there? See where Israel's at? And then all these other areas that are around there kind of show the relationship between the nations and the groups and how they relate to that one that's in the middle, how they relate to Israel. And what's fascinating about this, the ones that are in all caps, so you'll see up at the top, you see Turkey, and then you see Syria, and then Lebanon as you come down, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Yemen. Those are all caps. Those are all nations that are close to Israel geographically, but how they connect with Israel, they use the darker line there, which means they don't have good relations with Israel. So as you look around there, you don't see a whole lot of nations that have any kind of good relations with Israel, do you? The only two that you do that are different are the USA and the European Union. Up there you see that they're linked to Israel with red lines. So I add that to tell you, here sits Israel in the middle of a whole bunch of other nations that don't get along, especially with them. And then the other piece that pops up here, can you go back to that one Raleigh there? The lowercase ones, if you look to the left there, you see the word Hamas, and below that is Hezbollah. Down a little bit further, you see the Islamic Jihad and Islamic State. Those lowercase ones, Al-Qaeda on over in the Iraq-Iran area over there, those represent other political or military groups that are in the region. And all of those guys hate Israel as well. And those groups have worked their ways into their influence into other countries. In fact, that's part of this problem here. Hamas has worked its way into Gaza, into the leadership, and they're the ones that started this attack. So it's a very complicated situation. Lots of different factors that make different kinds of people with different kinds of ideologies and religions and beliefs, and inevitably then conflict arises. That's kind of a generic background of why you see the conflict there. But then you got to wonder a little bit, okay, Israel, this modern Israel that we have there, how did they, become a nation, and why are they currently there? Because they've not been there for quite a while. If you go back about 100 years, a little more than 100 years, all of the Jewish people of Israel weren't there. They were scattered all throughout Asia, Europe, and even Africa. They had been scattered everywhere, and they had been persecuted for a long time. Why? Why were they persecuted for all this time? Well, one's because they're different. You know, the religious aspect that they have, they're very unique to any of the other peoples that were in that area. Their religion is different, the way they act is different, the way they dress is different, their diet's different. And you know, that just in itself causes, we're humans, we understand that. There's differences that are there. There was a time when Christians in our lousy history attacked Jewish people because we claimed that the Jews were the ones that killed Jesus. And so Christians came up and persecuted Jews for a long time because of that claim. Jews also were during this time, very shrewd about money, and they were charging interest to people that borrowed money there. And the Roman Catholic Church, it's wrong, you can't be doing that. And that caused conflict. So for all this time, they had been without a country. They were getting beat up by every country that they were in. And then World War I came in 1917-ish. At that time, the Ottoman Empire was in control of the region, and it was the British that then took over after that. And that was the beginning of a time where Britain realized we need a place for these people to not be persecuted. And it was starting in World War I that they started to allow the Jews to come back in and start to create a place where the Jews would have a home and to bring an end to all this mistreatment that these people had had for years. And originally they wanted to have two states, you know, where Israel could be with the Jews and the rest of the Palestinians could be there and live in peace. Well, things got way worse in World War II. We know about that. We know what Hitler did with the Nazis and the Holocaust. And at the end of that just added more pressure for the rest of the world to create a definite, specific place for Israel to be not persecuted anymore and have a place that they called home and allow them to defend themselves. So it was 1948 that the UN then recognizes Israel this opportunity to be just that, to be this nation, to have a home and to have the right to defend themselves. But you know, ever since then, there's never been peace. You know that as long as you've lived. About every other week, you know, you see something happening with Israel and somebody else. There's just not peace in that region. And why is that? I think we need to stop and pause and think about why is that the case? And from a scriptural, from a faith perspective, I would say all of us are of the flesh. And when we're left alone without the only kind of change that can come from God's mercy, that flesh that is in all of us has this propensity to rebel against God's will, and then ultimately then gets this idea of a sinfulness within us that then manifests into things that are terrible, like wars and fights. Paul talked about this, and this is for all people. He says this in Galatians chapter 5 and 19. All people have flesh within them, and the works of the flesh are obvious: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, and factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and the likes, and the things like these. And that's how we all are. Those in the Middle East, me and you as well, because we are people of the flesh. We are of Adam, and we have these tendencies within us. And I think for us, the one takeaway, the headline news story that is here, I think the first takeaway that we need to internalize, each of us individually, is the atrocities of war that we're seeing here. It's all about this flaw that we all have in our humanity. And I think we need to know that. We can see it there. It's very obvious in what we see in the TV with what's happening over there, but it's just a matter of time before the impurity that's within us, the jealousy that Paul talks about, the anger that is within all of us, the prejudices that we have, it inevitably, when left alone, will turn to war, as we're seeing right now. But there are other kinds of wars that I believe the flesh works with all of us. Not wars that necessarily have to do with laser-guided bombs and bullets and all the stuff that we're seeing there, but the kind that cause us to have brokenness in our relationships and hatred between one another. Those are wars. We have relationships that have been shattered for years and there's been no attempts at reconciliation. That's a war. We have all kinds of abuses within our relationships. We've had dishonesty and unfaithfulness, and we gossip and we malice. All of these things are the effects of that flesh, and they're within all of us. No, we're not shooting each other, but it's the same kind of results because of the flesh that we have. And so I think that first takeaway is for us to just pause and not simply point fingers at those guys and the results of war that are there, but we need to recognize this is in me too. And if it wasn't for the saving work of Christ and the good work that he's done inside of us that's changing us to have victory over that flesh, that we would be in the same mess. So these people that got this nation in 1948, and I said that they were scattered and brought back in here in the early part of the 20th century. How did that work out? And I think, to me, this is one of the most fascinating things that has happened in all of human history. Because where those people were, where the Jewish people were before they were scattered in Europe and Asia and throughout the Middle East and through Africa, where they were before was there. It was in the very land that they are in now. And what is amazing is when they were there. The people of Israel were a nation in this land way back then. We'll hit this a lot in the next few weeks, but if you take a look at lower right-hand corner, you come up and you see the current conflict in 2023. That's where we are. And if you back up just a little bit, you see Israel became a nation, the rebirth of Israel in 1948. You got to go all the way back to 70 AD, and that's when the Jewish people were in Israel. So from 70 AD to 1948, they were without a country. They were in all of Europe, Asia, Africa, and all that area without a country for so long. It's the Israel of Jesus' time. We're back in the time of Christ when those people were there. Jesus is crucified around 30 AD. About 40 years later, Rome comes in, destroys Jerusalem, and blasts all those people all out of Israel, and that's when they were scattered. Jesus is from that Israel, and he's Jewish. And so the Israel of these stories that we're seeing dominate the news today, that's the same Israel that Jesus came from. That's the same Israel where he was born, where he taught, where he was crucified, and where he died and rose again and started this new way of faith to enter into a relationship with the Father. And it's this Jesus and it's this Israel that he's going to return. It's the same one. And so this is where this current story of today's Israel and the war there, I think, intersects our faith. And that's why I think it's important for us to think about that. Think about how crazy it would be and how unlikely it is to think about a people who's going to be scattered in 70 AD when that second temple was destroyed. And all these people were forcibly pushed out by Rome. How is it that they could come back 1,900 years later and maintain their identity? It's really incredible. You think about that. How likely is that a people could do that? While they would have been in these other countries, they were facing terrible persecution, lots of discrimination. They would have been influenced by those cultures as well. There would have been pressure to not do all the Jewish thing they were doing. They would have been pressured to, live like the Romans, live like the Turks, live like the Ethiopians or whatever. That would have been difficult for them to do that. All the cultural diversity that they would have had in the communities they were living, that would have been challenging them for them to maintain their Jewishness. All of those cultural aspects would have been constantly challenged them to lose their identity, and probably no doubt some of them did. Some of those Jewish people that were there probably forever lost their Jewishness, but many of them maintained that culture. And partly that was because of the religious practices that they continued. Their faith endured. That played a crucial role in keeping their identity of being Jewish. They have weird customs, all the things that they do, they're different, but that helped them keep their identity, their rituals that they have, keeping their kosher diet and all the things that they do, their religious texts that we would call the Old Testament, that held them together, and that helped sustain their Jewish identity across all those generations. Clearly that would have been a factor, but I don't think that's the one factor that really held them together. To me, the greatest factor in this highly improbable event of them sustaining their identity as a nation is the faithfulness of their God. God chose these people a long time ago, and he made promises to them to be their God forever. And part of that promise was for them to be blessed, for them to be a blessing, for them to have land. Those were the promises that God made to this people so long ago, and he is faithful. And I think a second takeaway for us is that we stop and think how profoundly difficult it would have been for a people to maintain their status for all those years, and we can really only attribute to the faithfulness of God. He has a plan for his people. He has a promise to them, and he has a plan to see them fulfill what he has promised to them. The prophet Isaiah said this about God's faithfulness to them. For the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. He made this promise. He is a faithful God, and he will do what he says he'll do. There's something about Israel. God's chosen this group of people for purpose. He has a plan for them, and he's made promises to them, and we know he's faithful. We're going to continue to explore Israel a little bit these next few weeks to learn more about this nation and what it means that God has chosen these people and what he's doing about bringing the redemption of the whole world through them. Israel, in a way, has always been speaking to the lost world. God is using them as a megaphone, telling the people about himself. God has created these covenants with the people for all of the world to come to know him, for all of the world, including us. And the one covenant that he made with David, he will fulfill when he said, there will be a king, he told David, that's going to sit on your throne. And he's going to be an eternal king. And we know that's Jesus. And that will be ultimately fulfilled when he returns where? Israel. Paul says in the book of Romans about Israel, these Israelites in chapter 9, verse 4, Sherry read for us. These Israelites, to them belong the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, and the promises. To them belong the patriarchs, and from them, according to the flesh, comes the Messiah, who is over all, God blessed forever. Amen. It's through that nation that you and I are sitting here. We know the Messiah. We know the Messiah came from Israel. We know the Messiah was Jewish. We know the Messiah came from that Israel, which is the same Israel we're seeing in conflict today. And what's so awesome for you and I, it's because he's so merciful. He has grafted us into this nation. You and I are integrated into Israel. We are his people. Because that happens when we entrust ourselves to the Son. So this grand story, as you kind of saw the graphic there that we'll come back to in the weeks to come, it's God's story. It's his story of Israel. It's his plan to redeem all of humanity through this nation, Israel. And that story of God's it's our story as well. And what we're seeing today, this conflict there, is part of God's great plan. And it's coming to an ultimate fulfillment when the Son returns. So I don't want us to be ignorant about what's happening around us. I don't want us to be insensitive to the needs of our neighbors around us here and the needs of those around all the world. And then may we be ever responding to this awesome grace of God that he has included us into this great plan that he has for me and for you. Would you stand and we will close. This is an old ancient Jewish blessing that was given called the Aaronic blessing. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face upon you and grant you peace. Amen. Have a great week.